Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another discussion video. Today I want to talk about the top meta strategies going into this post-emergency ban list format. We did one of these at the start of set 14, as we usually do with the start of a new set, but since we got the E-ban list, the format's basically been flipped on its head because of how many changes were made, so I figured we should reevaluate this type of video, come back to it, and talk about the top strategies going into this new format. So if you're new here, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you never miss a video, and if you guys want to help support the channel, there are many ways down in the description to do so as always. But today, if you guys are looking to make that competitive leap and step your game up, check out the Patreon down in the description. You can read the articles I post there, see where my head's at competitively, and you could also inquire about some coaching if you're interested in that. Really good time to check in on that, especially now we have September regionals coming up, so make sure you guys check it out down in the description. But anyways, let's get into the video, and I want to start with blue. The reason I want to start with blue is because I think blue is one of the top candidates for best color in format, kind of taking that away from red of last format and quite possibly black of like 2 or 3 formats ago, which is how many nerfs those two colors took. But I think blue is looking really well positioned, and I think these are the two decks to beat going into this new format. Soul Striker just looks so well positioned as like the mid-range deck of the format. You can fit so many engines, so it's even really hard to prepare for whatever type of Soul Striker you might face. You might face against Skillless Soul Striker with like SS2 Gohan cards like Astonishing Strike, where they can just wipe your board and swing at you for 2 triple strikes. You could be playing against Galactic Buster Bojack Soul Striker, where they're just the king of the combo step. It's a lot like Blue Yellow, and speaking of Blue Yellow, there is a Blue Yellow variant of that same deck. So they just do everything and anything in the combo step. Like, it's actually really hard to play against them. It's a deck that I'm going to be really interested in for sure, because it just seems like you have answers to basically every single thing in the format that you can think of, and you just have so many options, and you draw a fistful of cards. It's going to be insane. But besides that, I do think Blue Baby is still a really good blue deck as well. And yes, it did get nerfed on the recent emergency ban list, but in my opinion, it's just like a slap on the wrist type of nerf. It wasn't really like, you know, the deck is knocked down several tiers kind of nerf. Basically, now you can only cheat your costs on your counter cards if you have no battle cards in your battle area, which is fine. I think the deck can still function very well. It's just that, you know, now if they use like a Gohan Baby's minion, they can't follow it up with a Revenge Big Bang attack for 1 energy, which is great. I'm all for, you know, more simplistic ways to play around Blue Baby, but those cards like Gohan Baby's minion, like Vegeta Ready to Rumble, are gonna still be pretty tough to deal with unless you tech specifically for Blue Baby, which there are plenty of counterplays that get around these types of cards. It's just a matter of, is the meta going to adapt to it? And if Blue Baby shows up in high numbers, I think the decks that other people play will definitely feature those cards to counter it. But then it's another case of, well, I have to play X cards to counter X strategy, which is part of metagaming. It's fine. It was way more annoying when like Dark Broly was a deck you had to tech against. So if it's Blue Baby and you're going to tech some counterplays that are actually pretty generally good in other scenarios, I'm pretty cool with that. Nice thing is, though, if you're playing blue like a Soul Striker, or maybe a more rogue blue deck like an SS2 Gohan or something like that, you actually have a built-in answer to Baby's Floodgates in the form of God Sealing Technique Trunks and even Golden Great Ape Avenger if you're playing that card in your deck. So that's a pretty cool kind of thing there. But yeah, I think blue is super well positioned. One of the main changes to Baby, though, that I do actually like is that you can't really play cards like Obuni or other just like random mid-game cards. It is a deck that's now much more reliant on actually getting to turning the tide, because again, if you play mid-game battle cards, you're just shutting off your ability to play cheaper counter cards. So that's a cool thing the deck has going for it in terms of a nerf that makes it a bit more fair and easy to combat. Still going to be some pretty long games when you go up against it, though, just because of the nature of the deck and how stally it is. But I think blue is once again competing for that top color spot in the meta. Then we have green. So green is actually looking pretty promising now for a few reasons. Obviously, some of the nerfs like Dark Broly and the crazy King Vegeta aggro make green a little bit more favorable. But besides that, especially when we talk about hand control like Cell Surge, if blue is at the top, especially Blue Baby, hand control looks really appealing. Maybe not so much against Soul Striker, because honestly, Soul Striker draws just like way too many cards for hand control to actually be crazy effective. Don't get me wrong, it's still annoying for Soul Striker or whatever mid-range deck you want to talk about that draws a fistful of cards, but it's just a little bit less effective. But against like a Blue Baby or even some of the yellow decks that might be good in the format, hand control is really good. Now don't get me wrong, there are plenty of checks to hand control that you can play in the sideboard, like Deborah Ritual at hand, and then yellow and green both have free play battle cards that if they're pitched by your opponent, you can play them and draw. So hand control is not going to like take over the format by any means. I don't expect Cell Surge to be super popular, but I do actually expect it to be quite good. So it is kind of cool that green seems to be on the up and up as far as my opinion goes, at least. King Cold, I'm putting it here just because of, you know, its previous accomplishments go from like set 13 format. I think the deck is okay, although I do think it actually gets worse if the format slows down, and here's why. My thing with King Cold is that it was really good at punishing decks that self-awaken quickly. So like your Mecha Friezas, like your Dark Broly's, kind of like your King Vegetas that self-awaken quickly. I think the deck is really good at punishing those types of decks that get down to 4 quickly, because you're swinging with a 35k double strike leader. That's just really difficult for your opponent to deal with if they're at 4 life by like turn 2, right? And they're doing that to themselves. Now with the format slowing down, I do think King Cold is less of a good like anti-meta green pick, if that makes sense, just because of that reason. But on the flip side, if King Cold's not receiving as much pressure as early, I think that is a good thing for King Cold, because it can ramp up its energy just a little bit and play some of its higher end battle cards like Golden Frieza, Pinnacle of the Clan, which is a really solid 3-drop boss monster, if you want to call it that, because of its ability to swing twice, to pick a card out of the opponent's hand, to remove a battle card ignoring barrier, and it has Deflect, so that's well positioned against blue. So I do think King Cold has some potential, again, based on its prior merits and how it's looking going into the format. And Green Boo, this is a deck that I think a lot of people are really hopeful for, and I kind of see it now. I didn't really like Green Boo on release, mostly because of the other things that we were able to do in the game were just so much better, like Mecha Frieza, like King Vegeta, like Dark Broly. But with Boo's position now, so much like 15k spam has been nerfed, at least from like the King Vegeta side of things. So I think Boo can kind of fill that role pretty nicely. I don't think Boo is going to be like, you know, green good stuff like some people might want to play. I think that'd be more like your Cell Surge type of deck. But I think Boo can really fit that 15k spam role very nicely, just via, you know, your 1-drops, unit absorbing, even your 2-drop Boo Unadulterated Malice, you know, negating that and basically putting a topo on your opponent, and then unit absorbing that, and then just you keep going. So basically, yeah, I think this is going to be a pretty solid green strategy. I don't think it's going to be as good as Cell Surge or King Cold, but, you know, time will tell on that. Again, I say this a lot, but 15k spam is nothing new for Dragon Ball Super, and we have tons of ways to deal with it, but it can be decent, especially if you're accruing a lot of advantage and you're able to apply that pressure and maybe play some answers to different floodgates like we talked about earlier. I think that could be pretty good. Next up, we got to talk about red. Now, this is the toughest one to talk about because I think this is the most like free-for-all type of color, at least going into this post-emergency ban list format. Obviously, King Vegeta was slated as the quite possible best deck of the previous format, but now that King Vegeta is basically unplayable, there are a lot of different red decks that could be really good. And I definitely think that red has knocked down several pegs from like top color in the meta to just a pretty good color in the meta. So as far as leaders that I think can step up, I think Starter Vegeta is very well positioned. I think he's very flexible in how he can be built and how he can be played. You have more aggressive versions like Bardock's Crew, for example. All the Bardock's Crew stuff works with Vegeta because they just care about having a red Sand leader, not actually having a red Bardock leader. So I think that's a pretty good aggressive version of the deck. And on the flip side, I think that U7 Vegeta is a pretty good mid-range version of the deck, just because of cards like Divine Presence and Surprise Attack Gohan being really solid. Maybe even go a blue-red route, getting in your cooler arrivals with your Divine Beerus super combos. I think that could be a possible way for the deck to go. Again, the deck is just very flexible, and I think it can do some pretty solid things. And it's just a leader and a strategy because of how it relies on 2-drop unisons and how good 2-drop unisons are in red right now. It's just a leader and a strategy that's gonna accrue a lot of advantage no matter how you build it, really. I think Jiren's also pretty solid. I don't think it's going to be top tier or anything, but I think it's possibly going to be one of the better red decks because it does have the ability to spam a board pretty early. The leader does play 1-drops for free on the Unawakened side, which allows you to then free evolve into your 15Ks. And, setting up those 15Ks early, it's kind of like Green Boo in that sense, where you can get 15K spam off pretty easily. But comparing it to Boo, Jiren actually has a much more playable boss monster in the form of Zenith of Power, which is much more than really Green Boo has, because you can play that guy as early as turn 3, where Boo's quote-unquote boss monster comes out on turn 5. So I do think Jiren is well positioned for that reason. Launch, I think, is also in a good spot for a few reasons. One, I think Red Green is also taking a severe indirect hit from this ban list because it was just so good in King Vegeta. It was one of the very good forms of King Vegeta aggro, but I think now that it's a little bit more tough to play red-green in certain decks, but Launch is still one of those decks that can do it pretty effectively. But besides that, I actually think red-blue Launch is also really good if you're up against a relative large amount of like these aggressive decks, because red-blue Launch could just be so defensive. But even against mid-range, like, it's actually relatively possible to deck your opponent out with red-blue Launch because of how long you could drag out the game and your cooler arrivals. Maybe you can even tech in Frieza 100% overdrive. But besides that, I think Launch is well positioned depending on how you want to build her. It's going to be kind of like Vegeta, where it's a much more flexible red deck you can play. And I do think Red Broly BR is one of the remaining good aggro decks of the format. It did see a nerf with Planet Vampa. Now basically Planet Vampa is only a starter card. You can't use it to further your already established board. But I think that's fine. I think Red Broly still sets up for a turn 3 kill very nicely. Basically, turn 1 setup, turn 2 swap up into your 5-drop, and then turn 3 you're looking to resolve that Piccolo Unison -6, bring out Fearless Pan, and just swing with everything. I think that's a really solid aggro setup for turn 3. So I do think it's good. I don't think a lot of people will play it because the deck just seems to have fallen off over the past several formats. But in my opinion, I do think it's good, and I'd want to be prepared for it going into a tournament. And then for black, we have kind of just like a progression of black decks. I think Vegex is your good aggro black pick. I think Gogeta Xeno is your good mid-range black pick. And I think that Hatch is your good control black pick. And they're all really just like thwarting the Dark Empire decks. Like Vegex and Gogeta Xeno are going to rely more heavily on SS3 thwarting the Dark Empire, as where Hatch is going to revolve around that SS4 Gogeta thwarting the Dark Empire, just basically controlling the game, slowing the game down, and basically whittling your opponent out of resources. Gogeta Xeno is not going to be able to be as fast as Vegex because you don't have like your free million to play guys. You just don't spit out as many bodies as Vegex can. But I do think it draws a lot more cards than Vegex because of the ability to draw upon Union Fusioning. So I think it can build a bit more advantage, play a bit more defense with like the Supreme Kai of Time, Space Time Labyrinth negate, stuff like that. I think these are all really well positioned black decks. And finally, we got to talk about yellow. I think this is also in the same vein as red, like very, very free-for-all because of the Mecha Frieza hit. Although Mecha Frieza wasn't really seeing play in the 2 weeks of like regular Cross Spirits format before the E-ban list. So yellow, I do think, is in a free-for-all state. I think Kid Gohan is actually really, really good. If you're looking to play blue-yellow with a yellow leader to abuse cards like Raider's Warcry and the one of Bergamo and Power of a Super Saiyan, I think Kid Gohan's honestly probably your best pick. There are some other leaders you can do this with, like Yellow Gotenks, for example. I just think that Gohan is going to draw way more than any other leader you can pick, so I think it's really good. Sin Shenron, I think the mid-range control version of Sin can definitely creep back into the meta since things are slowing down. That tap 6 activate main is still really, really tough to beat, although unfortunately blue can just God Sealing it and you're gonna have a pretty bad time. But against other slower decks, this can be really solid. And then SS4 Goku, I think it's a really good mono yellow deck coming out of set 14. There's not really too many really playable strategies out of set 14, but I think that SS4 Goku is a really good one because you can gain a lot of advantage while putting guys into play for cheap, which historically mono yellow hasn't really been able to do. Sin Shenron can kind of do that as well, but your win turn is far later than SS4 Goku's, so I think that's a pretty well positioned strategy. But anyways, guys, I do want to know in the comments below what you think about these picks. Which decks are you looking forward to playing post emergency ban list? Let me know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.